She didn't run when she heard his spurs on the porch. She stood straight, chin up, hands trembling at her sides, and said, "You can take your horse, mister, but first you're going to hear what that animal meant to 3 hungry children and a dead man's broken promise." Jack Forrester hadn't come for a story. He'd come for what was his. But something in her voice stopped him cold. If this story already has your heart, subscribe, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The summer of 1876 burned across Colorado like God himself had lost patience with the land. Jack Forrester had been riding since before sunup, and the heat was already sitting heavy on his shoulders by the time he crested the ridge above the Thompson homestead. His canteen was half empty. His mood was worse. He'd been tracking his Appaloosa for 3 days. 3 days in August heat. 3 days of reading hoofprints in the cracked earth, asking questions in 2 different towns, and getting nothing but shrugs and sideways looks. The mare Callie, he'd named her after his late mother's favorite song, was worth more than money to him. She was the finest horse he'd bred in 6 years of working the land outside Fort Lyon, and somebody had walked right into his corral in the dead of night and taken her. He'd half expected to find her in some outlaw's camp, run ragged and half-starved. He had not expected to find her grazing peacefully behind a widow's fence brushed clean, her coat gleaming like copper in the morning sun. Jack pulled his gelding to a slow stop at the gate and stared. Callie lifted her head ears forward and looked at him with those wide, familiar brown eyes. "Well," he said quietly to no one in particular. "There you are." He stepped down from the saddle and tied his horse to the post. His hand rested on the gate latch for just a moment. The homestead was modest. A small clapboard house, a leaning barn, a kitchen garden that had seen better days. Laundry on the line. 3 small pairs of boots on the porch. A woman's boots beside them, worn down at the heel. He opened the gate and walked through. He was halfway to the fence line, where Callie stood, when the front door opened. "That's far enough." The voice was steady, more steady than he expected. He stopped and turned. She was standing on the porch with a shotgun leveled at his chest. Not shaking, not crying, just holding it with the particular stillness of a woman who'd already survived something worse than him. She was young. Younger than he'd expected. Dark hair, sun-weathered skin. Eyes that were some shade between gray and green that he couldn't quite name from this distance. She was thin, in the way that wasn't chosen, the kind of thin that came from skipping meals, so your children didn't have to. "Ma'am," Jack said. He kept his voice calm. He kept his hands where she could see them. "I believe that horse behind you belongs to me." "I know who she belongs to," the woman said. "I've known for 2 weeks." That landed differently than he expected. He let it settle for a moment. "Then you know why I'm here." "I do." She didn't lower the gun. "And I'll give her back. I swear to you, I will, on my husband's grave, I will return her. But I am asking you, I am begging you to hear me out first. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Jack looked at the shotgun, looked at her eyes, looked at those small boots on the porch. He crossed his arms over his chest. "You've got 2 minutes, he said. "And then I'm taking my horse." Something flickered across her face. Not relief, not yet. Something more complicated than that. Like a woman who'd been clenching her fist so long she'd forgotten how to open her hand. She lowered the shotgun slowly, rested it against the porch railing, walked down the steps. "My name is Willa Thompson," she said. "My husband was Daniel Thompson. He died 4 months ago. Fever." She said it the way people said things they'd said too many times, like the words had been worn smooth by use. "He left me with 3 children, 12 acres of decent land, and a debt to Victor Steele that I didn't know about until the man himself rode up here 2 weeks after the funeral." Jack's jaw tightened at that name. He didn't say anything. "You know him," Willa said. She'd caught it. "I know of him." "Then you know what he is." She looked at him steadily. "Daniel borrowed money from Steele 2 years ago. He never told me. The interest was, it was criminal, Mr. Forrester. Jack Forrester." "Mr. Forrester." She folded her hands in front of her, and he could see that her knuckles were white. "Steele came with papers. Legal papers, he said. Said Daniel owed him $460, and if I couldn't pay it by the 1st of September, he'd take the land. She paused. He smiled when he said it. Jack said nothing. I had $43, Willa said. That was everything. I sold Daniel's tools. I sold his watch. I sold the second mule. Her voice didn't waver, but her eyes did just slightly, just for a moment the way a candle flame moves in a draft. I got to $212, and then I ran out of things to sell. And so you took my horse, Jack said. She met his eyes. I saw her at the stock auction in Millhaven. I wasn't buying, I was there trying to sell Daniel's saddle. But I saw her, and I saw how she moved, and I thought... She stopped, started again. I thought if I could borrow her just long enough just to ride into Fort Lyon and stand in front of Judge Canton and make him look at me instead of brushing me away, maybe I could buy myself some time. You thought riding up on a fine horse would make the judge take you seriously. I thought arriving on foot like a beggar would guarantee he didn't. Her chin came up. I was right about that at least. I've tried twice before. The bailiff turned me away at the door both times. He said... She pressed her lips together. He said the judge didn't meet with farm women. The words sat between them in the heat like something rotting. Jack uncrossed his arms. He looked at Callie still grazing peacefully along the fence, indifferent to the whole business. Then he looked back at Willa Thompson. You were going to steal my horse, he said, to get a meeting with a judge. I was going to borrow her, she said with a precision that surprised him. I was going to return her the moment I had what I needed. I left a note in the stall. I didn't find any note. It was under the water bucket. I didn't want the wrong person to find it. She looked down for just a moment. I know it was wrong. I know it was. But Mr. Forrester, I have 3 children and 12 acres, and a man who's trying to steal both from under me, and I was desperate. She looked back up at him. I don't have the luxury of doing things the proper way when the proper way keeps slamming the door in my face. Jack was quiet for a long moment. The sun pressed down on both of them. Somewhere inside the house, a child made a sound. A small voice quickly hushed. He turned and looked at the house, then back at her. How old? He asked. She blinked. What? Your children. How old are they? A pause. When she answered, something in her voice softened despite herself. 7, 5, and 3. He looked at the small boots on the porch again. There was a long silence. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the dry brush beyond the fence. Victor Steele, Jack said finally. He's been running that kind of scheme for years. I know 2 other families he's bled dry. Willa stared at him. And nothing's been done about it. He's friendly with the county bank and the land office, Jack said. And he's got money enough to make problems go away. He met her eyes. But if those papers aren't clean, and with Steele they're rarely clean, there might be something to work with. Willa took a step forward. You'd help me. He hadn't said that. He wasn't sure he'd meant to imply it. But the words had come out of his mouth all the same, and now she was looking at him with something in her eyes that he couldn't name and couldn't walk away from. Not desperate hope, not exactly. More like the look of a woman who'd stopped expecting anything from the world and hadn't quite figured out what to do when something unexpected happened anyway. I didn't say that, he said. You were about to. He almost smiled. He stopped himself. I said there might be something to work with, he said. I need to see those papers. Willa turned and went inside without another word. She came back with a folded envelope and held it out to him. He took it, opened it, read. He was a careful man. He read it twice. The promissory note was written in Steele's hand. He'd heard enough stories to recognize the style. The terms were there in plain ink, $200 borrowed at 20% interest, compounded quarterly. That alone was enough to make his stomach turn. But it was the date that stopped him. He looked up at her. This is dated March of '74. Yes, your husband's been paying on this for 2 years. He must have been. She shook her head slowly. He never told me. He didn't. Daniel was proud. He didn't like to worry me. Or maybe he was ashamed. Her voice dropped. I'll never know now. The compounding rate they've written here isn't legal, Jack said. Not in Colorado. There was a statute passed in '72. He tapped the paper. An attorney would know this. Willa stared at him. I can't afford an attorney. I know one who owes me a favor. Silence. You'd do that? She said quietly. Not a question. Something between a question and a thing she didn't dare believe yet. I didn't say, you were about to. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he folded the papers carefully, the way you handle something that matters, and held them back out to her. I'll send a wire to Fort Collins today, he said. My friend Thomas Hale. He's a good man and a better lawyer. If he can come out before the end of August, and if those interest terms are what I think they are, you might have grounds to fight this in court. Willa took the papers from his hand. For just a moment, her fingers shook. Why? She asked. He picked up his hat from where he'd set it on the fence post, turned it in his hands once, and put it back on. Because I've watched Steele do this to people I respected, he said simply. And because those children inside don't deserve to lose their home, because their father died before he could fix his mistakes. He walked back toward Callie, ran his hand along the mare's neck. She turned and nuzzled his sleeve, and he let her for a moment. Then he looked back at Willa Thompson. You ride her well, by the way, he said. She doesn't let just anybody. And something broke open in Willa's face. Then, not tears quite, but something adjacent to them. Relief and grief and something she didn't have a name for all at once. I'll take good care of her, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, until you need her back. I'll send word, Jack said. He mounted his gelding, turned him toward the gate. Mr. Forrester. He looked back over his shoulder. Thank you, she said. It was a simple thing. 2 words. But she said them the way a person says something they've been holding in their chest for a long time with the careful, fragile weight of someone handing over something precious. He tipped his hat. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Thompson, he said. We've got a long road ahead. He rode out through the gate and back onto the dry Colorado road, the August sun beating down on his back, Callie's soft whinny following him until he crested the ridge and the homestead dropped out of sight behind him. He didn't let himself think about those gray-green eyes until he was a good 2 miles down the road. And then he thought about them for the rest of the ride back to Fort Lyon. Victor Steele was sitting on the porch of his office on Main Street when Jack rode past, or rather, Jack saw him and deliberately didn't slow down. But Steele noticed him. Steele had the particular gift of a man who always knew when the world was moving in ways that might affect him. Forrester, he called. Haven't seen you in a while. You find that horse of yours? Jack kept riding. Found her. Good, good. Steele's voice was cheerful in that way that had nothing to do with happiness. Terrible thing, horse theft. Hope you dealt with it appropriately. Jack stopped his gelding, turned in the saddle to look at the man. Steele was thick through the middle now, going gray with small eyes that never quite matched his smile. He was wearing a good suit, well pressed, the kind of suit that said, I don't work with my hands, and meant it as an insult to men who did. I dealt with it, Jack said. Steele leaned back in his chair. Anyone I know. Just a widow woman, Jack said, keeping his voice easy. Trying to feed her children. Something moved behind Steele's eyes, quick and gone. Well, he said. Law's the law. It is, Jack agreed. All of it. He held Steele's gaze for one long second, long enough to let the man know that he'd heard something he wasn't meant to hear, and was deciding what to do about it. Then he rode on. Behind him, Victor Steele stopped rocking, and watched Jack Forrester ride toward the telegraph office. The wire went out that afternoon. Thomas, need your eyes on a lending contract. Terms may violate 72 statute. Widow with 3 children and bad luck. Come soon as you can. Jack. He sent it, folded his change into his pocket, and walked back out into the heat of Fort Lyon's Main Street. He stood there for a moment, hat tilted against the sun, thinking about a woman standing on a porch with a shotgun and something like courage in her spine. Then he walked to the sheriff's office and knocked on the door. There was work to do. Sheriff Dale Pruitt was a man who'd learned long ago that the easiest way to keep a job was to avoid doing it badly, which in Fort Lyon mostly meant not doing it at all. He was behind his desk when Jack walked in, feet up, hat over his face, making the particular kind of noise that wasn't quite snoring, but wasn't quite breathing either. The deputy, a boy of maybe 19 named Cass, looked up from the corner where he was oiling a rifle and gave Jack the look of a person who'd stopped being embarrassed about his superior a long time ago. "He awake?" Jack asked. "Depends on your definition," Cass said. Jack walked to the desk and set his hand flat on the surface. The sound woke Pruitt with a jerk, hat, falling boots hitting the floor, the full performance of a man trying to look like he'd been thinking hard the whole time. "Forrester." Pruitt straightened his vest. "What do you need?" "I need you to do your job," Jack said. He pulled up a chair and sat down without being invited, which told Pruitt immediately that this wasn't a social call. "You know the Thompson homestead. 12 acres East Fork Road, widow woman named Willa Thompson." Pruitt's face did something complicated. "I know of it. Victor Steele's been pressuring her to vacate. Claims her late husband owed him $460 on a note with compounding interest that violates the Colorado statute of 1872. Jack kept his voice flat and even. "I need you to formally record a complaint." Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Too quiet. "Steele's a tax-paying citizen," he said finally. "If he's got legal paperwork—" "I didn't ask for your opinion on Steele," Jack said. "I asked you to record a complaint. That's your job. The woman has a right to file." "She can file at the land office. The land office is staffed by a man named Gentry who has dinner with Steele every Thursday," Jack said. "I need it recorded here in this office with your signature on it so that when Thomas Hale arrives from Fort Collins and takes this to Judge Canton, there's an official record that the complaint was made and properly handled." The name Thomas Hale landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. Pruitt's feet came down off the desk. "Hale's coming here. Sent the wire this afternoon." Pruitt looked at the desk, looked at his hands, looked at Cass, who had suddenly become very interested in his rifle again. "I don't want trouble with Steele," Pruitt said, quieter now. "Then do it clean," Jack said, "and there won't be any trouble. Because the kind of trouble that comes from not doing it clean, when a lawyer from Fort Collins is already on his way, that's a different kind of trouble altogether." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Pruitt pulled open his desk drawer and took out a form. Jack watched him write. Didn't say anything. When Pruitt slid it across for signature, Jack signed it as witness, folded his copy, and stood up. "I appreciate your cooperation, Sheriff," he said in a tone that made it clear it wasn't appreciation so much as expectation that had been barely met. He was at the door when Pruitt's voice came after him, low and not quite steady. "Steele's going to know you were in here." Jack looked back over his shoulder. "I expect he will," he said, and walked out. He was 2 steps down the boardwalk when he almost collided with Margaret Alcott, who ran the dry goods store with her husband and knew approximately everything that happened in Fort Lyon before it happened. "Jack Forrester," she said, steadying the basket on her arm. "You look like a man who's been picking fights with people bigger than him." "Afternoon, Mrs. Alcott. Is it true you found your horse out at the Thompson place?" He looked at her. "Word travels fast." "Word travels at the speed of Mrs. Pruitt seeing you ride past the jail, which is faster than the telegraph." She tilted her head. "Is Willa Thompson in trouble?" He hesitated just long enough for her to read the answer. Margaret Alcott pressed her lips together. "She's a good woman," she said quietly. "Came into the store last month to buy flour for the children. Paid in buttons because it was all she had. I gave her the flour anyway." She looked at Jack steadily. "Steele's been circling that land for 2 years. Before Daniel even died." That stopped him. Before Daniel borrowed that money for seed and equipment after a bad season. Steele knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote those terms. The man doesn't lend money to help people, Jack. He lends it to own them. She shifted her basket. You planning to do something about it? Working on it, he said. She nodded once with the decisive economy of a woman who didn't waste time on doubt. You need character witnesses for the judge you come to me. She walked past him, then stopped and turned back. And tell Willa Thompson that there's a box of supplies with her name on it at the store. No charge. She's too proud to come in and ask, so you're going to have to tell her it isn't charity. Tell her it's a loan. That way she'll take it. Jack watched her go. Then he stood there on the boardwalk for a moment in the August heat, thinking about the way a town could be two completely different things at the same time. Steele and Margaret Alcott living 2 doors apart. Both of them real. Both of them. Fort Lyon. He went to pick up the supplies. He didn't go back to the Thompson homestead that day. He went home, fed his horses, ate a cold supper, and tried not to think about gray-green eyes and trembling knuckles and a woman who'd aimed a shotgun at him with steady hands and said, "You're going to hear me out." He thought about her anyway. He was up before dawn the next morning, which was not unusual for him. What was unusual was the direction he started writing. He told himself it was about the case. He told himself it was because he needed to see those papers again, to look for anything he might have missed, to be ready with information when Thomas Hale arrived. He told himself a lot of things on that 2-mile ride in the gray early light. He stopped telling himself things when he crested the ridge and saw smoke coming from the Thompson chimney and felt something in his chest that had no business being there. He knocked on the door. There was a pause and then her voice cautious. "Who's there?" "Jack Forrester." A longer pause. Then the door opened, and she was standing there, in a work dress, hair not yet pinned a dish towel over her shoulder, with the look of a woman who'd been up for an hour already and had another 14 hours of work ahead of her. Behind her, 3 small faces peered around the doorframe, with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of children who haven't learned yet to hide their interest. "Mr. Forrester," she said. "Mrs. Thompson." He held up the box from Alcott's. "Mrs. Alcott sends these. She said to tell you it's a loan." Something moved across Willa's face, the particular pain of a proud person being forced to accept help. But she took the box. "Tell her thank you," she said quietly. "Also," he said, "I filed a formal complaint at the sheriff's office yesterday. It's on record. Steele can't say you haven't properly pursued redress now." She stared at him. "You did that. It needed doing." The smallest of the 3 children, the 3-year-old he guessed a girl with dark curls and a smear of something on her chin, pushed past her mother's skirt and looked up at Jack with enormous brown eyes. "Are you the horse man?" she asked. "Clara," Willa said. "Mama said a horseman was coming," the girl said with complete seriousness. "She said you owned the pretty spotted horse." "I do," Jack said. "She lets me pet her," Clara said. "She's very soft." "She is," Jack agreed. "Clara, go finish your breakfast," Willa said. The girl disappeared. Willa looked back at Jack with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Something between embarrassment and something softer. "They've been asking about Callie every morning," she said. She's been good for them. Since Daniel died, they've been..." She stopped, chose different words. "They've been quiet." "Grief does that," Jack said. "Yes." She looked at him. "Would you like to come in? I have coffee." He accepted. Not because he needed coffee, but because he realized already doing the thing he'd been trying not to do, which was finding reasons to be here. The inside of the house was small and clean, and wore its poverty with dignity. Everything mended, nothing wasted, the children's drawings tacked to the wall above the table with a care that made clear they were treasured. The oldest, a boy of 7, with his mother's gray-green eyes, sat at the table and looked at Jack with frank assessment. "You're the man who owns the Appaloosa," he said. "That's right." "Mama cried when she took her," the boy said. "She didn't know I saw, but I did." "Samuel," Willa said from the stove, her back to them. "It's true," Samuel said to Jack unapologetically. "She said she was sorry to the horse before she untied her. She said she had no choice." Jack looked at the back of Willa's head. Her shoulders were very still. She didn't have much choice, Jack said quietly. She was doing what she had to do for her family. There's no shame in that. Samuel considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old weighing a complex moral problem, then apparently decided it was satisfactory, and went back to his breakfast. Willa set a cup of coffee on the table in front of Jack without looking at him. Her hand, he noticed, was steady now. "Thank you for that," she said. "Low. Private. Not for the children." "It's true," he said. She sat down across from him. The 5-year-old, a girl named Lily, he'd learn later, with a missing front tooth, and the fearlessness of the middle child, crawled into Willa's lap without ceremony, and Willa's arms went around her automatically, the thoughtless, practiced grace of a mother. "Tell me about Thomas Hale," Willa said. "Your lawyer friend." "He's good," Jack said. "Sharp honest. He doesn't take cases he can't win." "And you think he'll take mine?" "I think the terms on that note give him something real to work with. Steele wrote that contract to be intimidating, not airtight. Men like him rely on the other person not knowing their rights." He looked at her. "Did Steele come back after the first visit?" "3 times, she said." Jack's jaw tightened. "What did he say?" Willa's hand moved in Lily's hair, slow and rhythmic. "The first time he said I had until September 1st. The second time he brought 2 men with him and said the deadline hadn't changed, but his patience had." She paused. "The third time he came alone, and he was very polite. That was the worst one." "What did he say that time?" She looked at the table. "He said he understood how hard it was to be alone. He said a woman in my position had to be practical. He said he'd be willing to renegotiate the debt if I was willing to—" She stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. The air in the room changed. Jack's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He kept his voice even. "What did you say to him?" "I told him to get off my land or I'd put buckshot in his hat," she said, still looking at the table. Then she looked up. "He laughed. He said I'd change my mind by August." The rage that moved through Jack was cold and clean, which was the most dangerous kind. He'd learned that about himself years ago. He didn't heat up like some men did. He went still. "He won't come back before we're ready for him," he said. She studied his face. "You sound very sure." "He's a careful man," Jack said. "He won't move while he thinks there's a lawyer involved. It'll make him slow down and recalculate." He looked at her steadily. "Which is exactly what we need." Willa was quiet for a moment. Lily had fallen asleep against her shoulder with the boneless abandon of a child who trusted completely that the person holding her wouldn't let her fall. "Why are you doing this?" Willa asked. Not accusingly. Not the way she'd asked it yesterday with her guard up. This was something more unguarded, genuine, and a little bit afraid of the answer. Jack thought about it honestly. "Because it's right," he said. "And because I've watched too many people lose to men like Steele, and told myself it wasn't my business. And now it's your business." He looked at the sleeping girl in her arms. At Samuel, still watching him from across the table with those 2 old eyes. At Clara, who had climbed back up onto her chair and was eating her porridge with the concentrated focus of the very young. "Now it's my business," he said. Thomas Hale arrived on Thursday. Jack met him at the stage stop at 2:30, recognized him by the way he stepped off the coach, unhurried, observant, already reading the town before his boots hit the ground. He was a lean man in his late 40s, with a calm face and the kind of eyes that lawyers developed from years of looking for the thing people weren't saying. "You didn't give me much in that wire," Hale said, shaking Jack's hand. "I gave you what mattered. Compound interest 72 statute." Hale picked up his bag. "Where are the papers?" "Widow's place 2 miles east. I'll take you after you've eaten." Hale looked at him. A slight pause. "You've been out there a few times." "I've been working the case," Jack said. Hale's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes moved with the particular amusement of a man who knew his friend well. "Of course you have," he said. "Let's eat." Over supper at the hotel, Jack gave him everything: the terms of the note, the dates, the payments. He suspected Daniel Thompson had been making the 3 visits from Steele, the sheriff's formal complaint, on record. Hale listened without interrupting, cutting his steak methodically and eating with the focused calm of a man who treated food as fuel and never tasted it when his mind was elsewhere. When Jack finished, Hale set down his fork. "The compounding rate is a problem for Steele, not for her," he said. "If it's written the way you're describing, we can argue the entire interest portion is void, which means she owes the principal $200 and nothing more." "She has $212. Hale looked at him. "You know her financials." "She told me." "She told you her financials." "Thomas, I'm just noting," Hale said mildly, "that she told a stranger she'd met once about her exact financial situation, which suggests she trusts you considerably for someone you've known 4 days. Are we going over the case or not?" "Both, apparently." But Hale let it go, which was one of the things Jack valued about him. "All right. 212 against a voided interest clause. She pays the principal, gets a receipt. Steele has no legal claim remaining. The question is whether Judge Canton will hear it." "He'll hear it if you're standing in front of him." "He'll hear it," Hale agreed, "and he'll rule on the law, which is what we need. Canton's a lot of things, but he's not in Steele's pocket. Too proud." He picked up his coffee. "When can I see the papers?" "Tomorrow morning." They rode out early before the real heat settled in. Jack let Hale ride slightly ahead once they turned onto the East Fork Road, which meant he was watching the house come into view from behind, watching Hale's posture shift as he registered the place, small, neat, quiet in the morning. When Willa opened the door, Hale took off his hat. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I'm Thomas Hale out of Fort Collins. I've been told you have a lending contract that needs looking at." Willa looked at him, then at Jack, then back at Hale. "You came a long way for that." "Jack Forrester sent me a wire," Hale said simply. "That's generally sufficient reason." Something shifted in Willa's expression. She glanced at Jack again quickly, and he looked at the fence post, which was interesting to nobody. She let them in. Hale sat at the kitchen table with the papers for 20 minutes. He didn't speak. He made occasional small marks in the margin of his notepad. The children had been sent outside. Jack could hear them through the walls, Clara calling to Callie from the fence. Lily's higher laugh, Samuel's more deliberate voice. Willa stood at the stove and didn't move much. She was very still, in the way of someone trying hard not to show how much depended on the next thing someone said. Finally, Hale set down his pen. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "this interest clause is not enforceable under Colorado statute. Steele's attorney either doesn't know that, which I doubt, or hoped you wouldn't find out, which is considerably more likely." He folded his hands. "If we take this before Judge Canton, the interest is void. You owe the principal $200 and nothing further." Willa didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then she pulled a chair out from the table and sat down, not gracefully, but in the way of someone whose legs have stopped cooperating. $200, she said. "Which I understand you have." "I have 212. "Then you are $12 ahead of Victor Steele," Hale said with the dry, precise satisfaction of a man who loved the law best when it did what it was supposed to do. "I'll file a motion with Judge Canton's court by end of week. Hearing should be within the month." Willa put her face in her hands. Jack thought she might be crying. He wasn't sure. He looked at Hale, who looked back at him with that same careful, unreadable expression. Then Willa lifted her face, and she wasn't crying, or she had been briefly, but she'd put that away already. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set, and she looked, Jack thought, like someone who'd been drowning and had just remembered they knew how to swim. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. Hale nodded once, picked up his pen, and started talking. Jack leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, listening, watching her take notes in a careful hand, asking sharp questions that made Hale look up twice with something like genuine respect. She wasn't passive. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was learning the terrain so she could fight in it, and something about that settled into Jack's chest like something he hadn't known was missing. He was in serious trouble. He knew it the way you know certain things, not in a dramatic moment, not all at once, but with the quiet certainty of water finding the low ground. He was standing in a widow woman's kitchen, watching her fight for her children's future, and the thing happening in his chest was not going to be easy to walk away from. He pushed off the wall and went outside to check on the horses. Callie was at the fence. Clara had her arms wrapped around the mare's neck as far as they would go, and the horse was standing absolutely still the way she did when she'd decided someone was worth being gentle for. Jack stood there and watched them for a moment. Then Samuel appeared at his elbow, quiet as a cat. "Mr. Forrester," he said. "Samuel, is the lawyer going to fix it?" Jack looked down at the boy, 7 years old, watching the world with eyes that had already seen too much of the wrong kind of thing. "He's going to try," he said honestly. "Mama doesn't sleep," Samuel said, not asking for anything, just saying it. "She thinks we don't hear her, but she walks around at night. I hear the floorboards." Jack was quiet. "She's scared," Samuel said. "She doesn't say so, but she is." "I know," Jack said. "Are you going to help her?" It was the same question his mother had asked and Margaret Alcott had implied, and that Hale had asked with his eyebrows from across the supper table. But from this boy, it landed differently, without agenda, without maneuvering, with nothing but the bare earnestness of a child who needed a real answer. "Yes," Jack said. "I'm going to help her." Samuel looked at him for another moment, studying him the way children do when they're deciding whether to believe something. Then he nodded once with the finality of a judgment rendered. "Okay," he said, and went back to his sisters. Jack stood there in the August heat and understood that he had just made a promise to a 7-year-old boy that he intended to keep. Victor Steele found out about Hale on Friday. Jack wasn't surprised. Fort Lyon was a small town, and Steele had ears in most of it. What surprised him was the speed and the nature of the response. He was at his ranch mid-afternoon, working the fence line on the north pasture, when he heard a horse approaching too fast for a social call. He turned to find one of Steele's men, a heavy-set man named Cord, who rode for Steele, and occasionally for other purposes that were better not examined, pulling up hard 20 feet away. "Steele wants a word," Cord said. "Steele knows where my ranch is," Jack said, and went back to the fence. "He'd prefer somewhere neutral." "Tell him I'm busy." Cord's horse shifted restlessly. "He said to tell you this doesn't have to get complicated." Jack set down his fencing tool, turned around, looked at Cord with the kind of patience that was really just anger held on a very short leash. "You go back to Steele," he said, quiet and even, "and you tell him that a widow woman with 3 children and $200 has a lawyer from Fort Collins and a complaint on record with the sheriff, and if he wants to discuss that, he's welcome to do it in front of Judge Canton." He picked up the tool again. "Tell him I said good luck." Cord stared at him. Then he turned his horse and rode hard back toward town. Jack went back to work. But that night, he had Cass the deputy ride out to the Thompson homestead and tell Willa to keep her doors locked and not to answer anyone she didn't know. He did it without telling her who'd sent Cord, because he didn't want her frightened any more than she already was. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that Willa Thompson had already opened her door that evening to someone she did know. He found out the next morning when he rode up and found her sitting on the porch steps with a look on her face he hadn't seen before. Not fear, not grief, something older and colder than both. "What happened?" he said, getting down from the saddle. She held out a piece of paper. He took it and read. It was a letter, handwritten in a neat, careful script that made what it said somehow worse. "Mrs. Thompson, I have reconsidered my position. Given the current legal complications, I am prepared to forgive the debt entirely in exchange for the deed to the eastern 4 acres of your property. This is a generous offer and will not be extended again. You have until Sunday." V.S. Jack read it twice. Then he looked up. "He's splitting the offer," he said. "He knows he can't get the whole thing, so he's trying to take a piece." "The eastern 4 acres," Willa said, is where the water is." He stared at her. "The creek runs through it," she said. "Without that water, the rest of the land is worthless." Her voice was completely flat, emptied out. "He's not trying to take half my land. He's trying to make all of it worthless." Jack stood there in the early morning with the letter in his hand and felt something settle into place. Not a decision exactly, because the decision had already been made. More like the moment when you realize a decision made 4 days ago was larger than you understood at the time. "Don't answer it," he said. She looked up at him. "What if the judge doesn't rule in our favor?" "He will." "But if he doesn't?" "Willa." He said her name, not her title, without planning to. It surprised both of them. He kept going. "The law is on your side. Hale doesn't come out of Fort Collins for cases he's going to lose. And Steele knows it, which is why he's sending letters on a Friday night instead of waiting for the courthouse." He looked at her steadily. "He's scared. That letter is what scared men do." She looked at the letter in his hand, then at him. "You called me Willa," she said. "I did," he said. "I'm sorry if—" "Don't apologize," she said. And something in her voice had changed, the flatness gone, replaced by something warmer and more complicated and considerably more dangerous. "It's fine." It wasn't fine exactly. It was something more than fine. But neither of them said that. Jack folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "I'll take this to Hale," he said. "He should know Steele is getting nervous." He turned toward Callie, who was at the fence again, watching them with that calm, animal patience. "Jack," Willa said. He turned back. She was standing now, arms crossed, and she was looking at him with those gray-green eyes that he'd been trying not to think about, and mostly failing. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the lawyer, not for the filing, for—" She paused, chose carefully. "For saying we. Like it's your fight too." He held her gaze. "It is my fight," he said, quietly, without qualification. She looked at him for a long moment. The morning birds were loud, and the heat was already building, and somewhere Clara was calling to Callie from behind the fence, and the world was continuing entirely without their permission. "Okay," she said, soft, almost to herself. He tipped his hat, mounted up, and rode toward Fort Lyon with Steele's letter in his pocket, and the feeling in his chest that he'd stopped pretending wasn't there. Behind him, Willa Thompson stood on the porch and watched him go. And for the first time in 4 months, she didn't feel entirely alone. Thomas Hale read Steele's letter twice, set it on the table, and said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "He's panicking." "That's what I told her," Jack said. "And she didn't answer it." "Not yet. I told her not to." Hale picked up the letter again and held it toward the window light. "The handwriting is his. No attorney drafted this, which means he moved without counsel on a Friday night, which means he's reacting instead of planning." He set it down. "That's good for us. That's very good for us." "Or it means he has something else moving that we don't know about yet," Jack said. Hale looked at him. A pause. "You've gotten careful about this case." "I'm always careful." "You're careful about horses and fences and honest dealing," Hale said. "This is a different kind of careful." He let the observation sit there, without pushing it further, which was one of the things Jack valued and occasionally resented about him. "I'll file the motion Monday. Canton's court is backed up, but a statutory violation takes precedence. We should have a hearing date by Wednesday. And Steele's attorney, a man named Briggs out of Denver. He's competent, but not creative. He'll lean on the signed note and argue the terms were agreed upon by both parties." Hale folded his hands. "I'll argue that an agreement to illegal terms is not a binding agreement. The statute is clear. Briggs knows it's clear. He's going to try to make this about character instead of law." Jack went still. "Willa's character. He'll paint her as a desperate woman, making accusations to avoid a legitimate debt. He'll imply Daniel Thompson knew what he was signing and agreed willingly." Hale met his eyes steadily. "I need you to be prepared for that, and I need her to be prepared for it." "She'll hold," Jack said. No hesitation. I know she will, Hale said. I watched her take notes for 40 minutes and ask better questions than some attorneys I've worked with. I'm not worried about her breaking. He paused. I'm worried about you. Me. If Briggs goes after her in that courtroom, and he will because it's the only play he has, you're going to have to sit there and not react. Hale looked at him with the directness of a man who had known Jack Forrester for 15 years. Can you do that? Jack looked at the letter on the table. Yes, he said. Hale nodded slowly. All right, he said. Then let's win this thing. He rode to the Thompson place the next morning to tell her about the hearing and found her in the yard teaching Samuel to mend a harness. Not watching him do it, doing it alongside him, her hands moving over the leather, showing him the stitch, letting him try. Lily was chasing a chicken with the focused determination of someone who had no intention of catching it. Clara was sitting on the fence talking to Callie with the seriousness of a person conducting a very important meeting. Jack sat on his horse at the gate for a moment and just watched. He didn't mean to. He was a man who'd always prided himself on moving directly from one thing to the next, no lingering, no sentiment. But something about the scene stopped him. The ordinary weight of it, the way life kept going in the middle of crisis, children learning, and chickens running, and horses listening to small voices. Samuel saw him first. Mr. Forrester's here, he said to his mother, with no particular excitement, but no alarm either. The tone of someone reporting a familiar fact. Willa looked up. Something crossed her face, quick, unguarded, before she had time to organize it. Then she stood and brushed the leather dust from her hands. Hale files Monday, Jack said, getting down. Hearing should be set by Wednesday. She exhaled, short and controlled. That soon. He thinks Canton will move it up. Statutory violation, clear record. He looked at her. There are things you need to know about what to expect in that courtroom. She held his gaze. Tell me. He did. All of it the way Hale had told him Briggs's likely strategy, the character argument, the way they'd try to make Daniel look reckless, and her look opportunistic. He didn't soften any of it. She deserved the full picture, and he'd learned enough about her in a week to know that softening things would insult her more than the truth. She listened without interrupting. Samuel had gone back to the harness, pretending not to listen, and listening to every word. When Jack finished, Willa was quiet for a moment. They're going to say Daniel was foolish, she said. Yes. And that I'm trying to get out of his mistake. Yes. She looked down at the harness in her hands. He wasn't foolish, she said quietly. He was proud and scared, and he made a bad decision because he didn't want me to know how bad the season had been. She looked up. Those aren't the same thing. No, Jack said. They're not. Can Hale say that? Can he say who Daniel was? He can, Jack said. And I'll be there to say it too if the judge allows character witnesses. She looked at him for a long moment. You'd testify. I knew Daniel Thompson, Jack said. Not well, but enough. We worked the same auction circuit for 3 years. He was honest and he was hard-working, and he made one mistake with one dishonest man. He held her gaze. I'll say that under oath without blinking. Something moved through her, then not the careful, controlled emotion he'd seen before, but something raw, more immediate, the kind that catches people off guard precisely because they've been holding everything together so long that one moment of unexpected kindness breaks right through the seam. She turned away quickly toward the fence, her hand going to Callie's neck. He gave her a moment. I'm sorry, she said, still facing away. I don't usually... You don't need to apologize, he said. She turned back. Her eyes were bright, but her chin was up. I cry when I'm angry, she said. Not when I'm sad. Isn't that peculiar? No, he said. It makes sense to me. She looked at him like she was going to ask what he meant. Then she didn't. Some things he was learning they said without words in the space between what was said and what wasn't. Wednesday came with the hearing date August 22nd, 10 days away. They felt like 10 years and 10 minutes at the same time. Hale worked. Jack worked alongside him, pulling records from the land office carefully through channels Steele couldn't easily monitor, finding the names of 2 other families who'd borrowed from Steele under similar terms. One had lost their land. One had paid under protest and never recovered financially. Both were willing to speak to what they'd signed if Hale thought it useful. Pattern of practice, Hale said, reading the names. It's not directly relevant to her case, but it establishes intent. Canton will hear it. Steele's going to know I've been talking to those families, Jack said. Yes, Hale agreed. He is. Jack knew what that meant, and it meant he needed to be more careful than he'd been. He started taking different routes between his ranch and the Thompson homestead, which he was visiting every day now for reasons that were partly professional and mostly not. He noticed Steele's men in town more than usual, not doing anything, just being visible in the way that was meant to be noticed. He told Willa about it on a Thursday morning, plainly, because she had a right to know the shape of what they were dealing with. She listened, then said, "I found boot tracks behind the barn 2 mornings ago." His whole body went tight. "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now." "Willa." "I handled it," she said with a firmness that told him she absolutely had. "I moved the children to sleep in the front room, where I can see the door. I loaded the shotgun, and I told Samuel that if he hears anything in the night, he comes to get me and doesn't go outside." She met his eyes. "I've been protecting this family alone for 4 months, Jack. I know how to do it." He wanted to argue. He didn't. Because she was right, and because arguing would be about his discomfort, not her safety. "I'm going to ask Cass to do a pass by the road at night," he said instead. "I'd appreciate that," she said, quietly. Not as a concession, but as a genuine acknowledgement that she didn't have to do everything alone. The distinction mattered to both of them, he thought. That evening he stayed later than usual. They sat on the porch after the children were in bed in the particular stillness of a hot August night and talked. Not about the case, not about Steele, about Daniel. She told him stories, carefully chosen ones that showed who the man had been, stories Jack could use if he testified. And then she told him one that wasn't for testimony, just for herself, about the way Daniel used to sing off-key while he worked and claimed it made the crops grow faster. Jack laughed at that, a real laugh, the kind that surprised him. Willa looked at him with something warm and wondering. "I haven't heard you laugh before," she said. "I don't do it much," he said. "You should," she said. Simple, direct. And then she looked away at the dark yard as if she hadn't said it. He looked at the side of her face for a moment longer than he should have. Then he looked at the yard too. The night was full of crickets and the distant sound of the creek. Callie moved in the paddock, a quiet shape in the dark. "I need to ask you something," Willa said. "Ask." "After this is over." She stopped, started again. "If Hale wins this, if the debt is settled and Steele is done with us, what happens to Callie?" He understood what she was really asking. It wasn't about the horse. "I take her home," he said carefully. She nodded. Once. Carefully. "And you?" she said. The question was barely above a whisper, and it cost her something to ask it, he could tell. Her hands were in her lap, perfectly still in the way he'd come to recognize as her body's way of holding itself together. He looked at her. "I don't live far," he said. Just that. But the way he said it, and the way she received it, the small exhale, the slight loosening of her hands, meant something that neither of them put into words, because it was too new and too fragile, and the ground was still unsteady. "Okay," she said. Soft. The same word she'd used before with the same weight. He rode home in the dark and didn't sleep much. But it wasn't the bad kind of sleeplessness. It was the kind that comes from a life that's about to change in ways you can't yet see the shape of, and you're awake because you don't want to miss any of it. August 22nd arrived, the way significant days always do, too fast and too slow at once, ordinary in its sunrise, enormous in what it carried. Willa wore her best dress, which was clean and pressed, and showed the careful attention of a woman who understood that this was a performance as much as a proceeding. Her hair was pinned back, her boots were polished, and she walked into the Fort Lyon courthouse with her chin at an angle that dared anyone to underestimate her. Jack walked in beside her. Hale was already at the plaintiff's table, papers organized pen in hand. The courtroom was fuller than Jack had expected. Margaret Alcott was there sitting in the third row with her husband, her presence a quiet declaration of allegiance. Cass was there in his deputy's uniform. Two of the churchwomen Jack vaguely recognized, and a handful of other townspeople whose attendance meant something small, acts of witness, of showing up, of saying, "We see what's happening here." Victor Steele was at the defendant's table with Briggs, who was, indeed, competent-looking, and wore the expression of a man who'd won more courtroom fights than he'd lost, and knew it. Steele himself looked at Jack once when they came in with those flat, calculating eyes. Then he looked away. Jack sat directly behind Willa and did not look at Steele again. Judge Canton entered at 9 o'clock exactly. He was a tall, spare man in his 60s with a white mustache and the bearing of someone who'd stopped being impressed by things decades ago. He sat, looked at his papers, looked at the room over his glasses. "Hale," he said. "Your Honor." "Briggs." "Your Honor." "Let's get to it," Canton said. Hale was methodical and clean. He laid out the note. The dates, the statutory violation, the compounding rate, the plain language of the 1872 law. He didn't editorialize. He didn't appeal to sympathy. He presented facts with the confidence of a man who knew the facts were enough. Briggs was exactly what Hale had predicted. He acknowledged the statutory question. He had to, it was too clear to deny, but he pivoted immediately to intent. Daniel Thompson had signed the note willingly. He was an adult man making a business decision. His widow was now seeking to benefit from a technicality to escape a legitimate obligation. Jack kept his face still. He watched Willa's shoulders. They didn't move. Then Briggs said, "The plaintiff has, since her husband's death, enlisted the assistance of a neighboring rancher, Mr. Jack Forrester, whose personal interest in this matter appears to extend considerably beyond neighborly concern." Hale was on his feet before Briggs finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making implications about parties not before this court that are entirely irrelevant to a statutory question." "Sustained," Canton said without looking up from his papers. "Mr. Briggs, I'll remind you that this is a courtroom, not a parlor. Stick to the law." Briggs sat back. Jack exhaled through his nose. Next to him, he felt rather than saw the slight tension leave Willa's spine. The witness portion came next. Willa was called first. She walked to the stand the way she'd walked into the room. Chin up, hands, steady, the absolute refusal to be smaller than she was. She stated her name, her address, her relationship to Daniel Thompson clearly and without tremor. Hale walked her through the sequence, the debt she hadn't known about the day Steele arrived, the papers, the 3 visits, the letter about the Eastern Acres. She answered every question in plain, complete sentences, with the particular dignity of someone who'd rehearsed nothing because the truth didn't need rehearsing. Then Briggs stood up. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "your husband signed this note." "Yes," she said. "You were his wife at the time." "Yes." "Are you saying you had no knowledge of your family's financial situation?" "I'm saying my husband managed our accounts, and I trusted him to do so. That's not unusual for a marriage." "Or," Briggs said with a slight tilt of his head, "it might suggest that your husband didn't trust you with difficult information, which might suggest the debt was larger and more complicated than you're representing to this court." Jack's hand tightened on the bench. Willa looked at Briggs without blinking. "My husband didn't tell me about the debt because he was ashamed and proud and loved me. Those are human qualities, Mr. Briggs, not evidence of fraud." She paused, just a half beat precisely long enough. "Is there a question in there somewhere?" There was a sound in the courtroom. Not quite a laugh. The sound of a room shifting. Judge Canton's mustache moved slightly. He did not look up. Briggs moved on. He asked about the horse, Callie pointedly trying to establish that Willa had stolen property, and therefore was a person of questionable moral standing. Hale objected twice. Canton sustained once and overruled once, but allowed Willa to answer. "I took the horse," she said, "because I was a woman alone with 3 children, and a man trying to steal my land, and every legitimate door had been shut in my face. I returned her voluntarily the moment Mr. Forrester came to my property." She held Briggs's gaze. "And Mr. Forrester chose to help me rather than prosecute me, which speaks to his character and to the merits of my situation." Briggs sat down. It was not the end of the hearing, but it was the moment the room changed. Jack saw it happen. He saw it in the way Margaret Alcott's posture relaxed in the 3rd row, in the way Canton made a note on his paper with the particular deliberateness of someone writing something they intend to use, in the way Steele leaned toward Briggs and said something quiet and tight, and received a very small headshake in response. Hale called Jack to the stand. He stated his name, his property, his years in the county. He described knowing Daniel Thompson at the auction circuit. Honest, hardworking, a man who paid what he owed and kept his word. He described the terms of the note as Hale walked him through them, confirming the rate, confirming the statute, keeping everything clean and factual. Then Hale asked, "In your observation, Mr. Forrester, does Mrs. Thompson's account of events align with the documents before this court?" "Yes," Jack said. "Completely." "And in your professional understanding of land transactions in this county, do the terms as written constitute lawful lending practice under Colorado statute?" "No," Jack said. "They do not." Briggs cross-examined, briefly trying again with the personal angle. Jack answered every question with exactly as many words as the question required, and not one more. When he stepped down and walked back to his seat, Willa turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see her profile, and he saw her exhale slow and quiet, and full of something he wanted to be the reason for every day for a long time. He sat down and looked at the front of the courtroom and tried not to show any of that on his face. Canton recessed for 40 minutes. They were the longest 40 minutes Jack could remember. Willa sat straight at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, not moving. Hale reviewed his notes with practiced calm. The courtroom murmured around them. Jack sat behind her and watched the back of her neck, and thought about 10 days ago when he'd crested a ridge and seen a woman on a porch with a shotgun and no intention of backing down. Steele left the courtroom during the recess. Came back 5 minutes before Canton returned. He looked. Jack thought like a man who'd been making a phone call he didn't want to make, except it was 1876, so he'd been having a conversation, probably urgent, probably outside the back door. He sat down and looked straight ahead, and his jaw was set in a way that was different from when he'd walked in. Canton returned at 11:42. The room went completely silent. The judge sat, looked at his papers, looked at the room. "The lending terms as written in this promissory note," Canton said without preamble, "constitute a violation of Colorado Statute 1872, Section 4, regarding compound interest rates on private loans. The interest portion of this debt is therefore void and unenforceable." Willa's hands folded on the table pressed together once. That was all. "The principal amount of $200 remains a valid obligation," Canton continued. "Mrs. Thompson, you will pay the principal to Mr. Steele or his representative within 30 days. Upon receipt of that payment, Mr. Steele will have no further legal claim upon your property, its contents, or its water rights." He looked over his glasses at the defendant's table. "Mr. Steele, this court notes that the terms of this contract suggest a pattern of lending that this court will be reviewing for any other cases that may come before it. You are advised to conduct your business accordingly." Steele said nothing. His jaw was a hard line. "Court is adjourned," Canton said, and left. The room erupted. Not loudly, it was still a courtroom, but in the way rooms do when something that was held tight releases all at once. Margaret Alcott was on her feet. The churchwomen were talking to each other. Cass was nodding from his seat. Hale gathered his papers with the unhurried satisfaction of a man who'd done this before, and still found it worthwhile every single time. Willa sat absolutely still for 3 full seconds. Then she turned around and looked at Jack. Her eyes were full. Not spilling over. She wasn't that kind of woman, and they both knew it, but full the way a cup is full, right to the edge, shimmering. "We won," she said, like she needed to hear it out loud to believe it. "You won," Jack said. She shook her head very slightly. "We," her eyes said clear as speech. He reached forward and covered her folded hands with his. Just for a moment, brief, proper public, and felt her hands turn under his and grip just once before she let go. It was the smallest thing. It was not a small thing at all. They were outside on the courthouse steps when Steele walked past. He didn't stop. But he looked at Jack as he went by, and the look was not the look of a man who was done. It was the look of a man who was recalculating, who was filing things away, who had lost this round and was already thinking about the next one. Jack held his gaze until Steele looked away first. Then Steele was gone, and Margaret Alcott was there instead, taking both of Willa's hands in hers, and saying something Jack couldn't hear that made Willa close her eyes briefly and nod. Hale appeared at Jack's shoulder. "Canton's note about reviewing Steele's other contracts," he said quietly. "That wasn't procedural. That was a warning shot." "I know," Jack said. "There's a family named Brierly lost their land to him 18 months ago. If Canton opens a review, there may be grounds to revisit." Jack looked at him. "Is that a case you'd take?" Hale considered. "It's a case I'd look at," he said, "after I sleep for 2 days." He extended his hand. Jack took it. "She's remarkable," Hale said without elaboration, because it didn't need elaboration. Then he picked up his bag and walked toward the hotel. Jack turned back. Willa was standing a few feet away alone for a moment in the moving crowd, and she was looking at him with an expression he'd never seen on her before, unguarded, unhurried, without the particular guardedness of a woman managing a crisis. Just her. Just this. "What happens now?" she asked. He thought about what he'd said on the porch, "I don't live far." "Now," he said, "you go home and tell your children." She smiled. Full and real, the first genuinely unguarded smile he'd seen from her. And it did something to the air around her. Or maybe to him, it was hard to tell which. "And then," she said. "And then," he said carefully, "I'd like to come and call on you. Properly. If you're willing." She looked at him for a long moment. The August sun was fierce on both of them. The town moved around them indifferent. "I'm willing," she said, simply, directly, the way she did everything. He nodded once, tipped his hat. She turned and walked toward where she'd tied her borrowed horse. His horse Callie, who lifted her head as Willa approached, and nickered softly, and Willa put her hand on the mare's cheek and said something quiet that wasn't for anyone else to hear. Jack watched her go. Felt the particular weight of a day that had changed more than one thing at once. Then he became aware that Victor Steele's man Cord was watching him from across the street, not moving, just watching. Jack held the man's gaze for a steady 3 count. Then he turned and walked to his own horse mounted up and rode out of Fort Lyon with the knowledge that some things had ended today and some things had only just begun. Steele's look on those courthouse steps had told him everything. This wasn't over. The payment was made on a Tuesday. Willa walked into the Fort Lyon land office at 9 in the morning with $200 in an envelope and Jack Forrester 2 steps behind her. She'd counted the money the night before at the kitchen table twice, with Samuel watching and Lily asleep on the bench beside her and Clara already in bed. She'd laid each bill flat and smooth, the way you handle something that has cost you everything, and when she was done, she'd folded the envelope and held it in both hands for a long moment without speaking. Jack had been there. He'd sat across the table and let the silence be what it was. Now she set the envelope on Gentry's desk. Gentry, who had dinner with Steele every Thursday, and who had the look this morning of a man who'd been told something unpleasant was coming, and had decided the best strategy was to be professionally invisible about it. He counted the bills without meeting her eyes, wrote the receipt, signed it, stamped it, slid it across the desk, Willa picked it up and looked at it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket, with the particular care of someone putting away something they intended to keep for the rest of their life. "Thank you," she said to Gentry. Not warmly, but correctly. Gentry said nothing. Outside on the boardwalk, she stopped and looked at the paper in her hand one more time. The sun was already hot. The street was already busy. The town moved around them exactly as it always had. "It's done," she said, quiet, to herself as much as to him. "It's done," Jack confirmed. She exhaled slow and long, and releasing something she'd been carrying in her chest for 4 months and 11 days. Her shoulders dropped slightly. Not collapse, just the particular relief of a person who's been standing at attention so long they've forgotten what rest feels like, and then suddenly remembers. Jack didn't touch her. They were on Main Street. But he stood close enough that she could feel the solidity of him beside her, which was its own kind of steadiness. "I need to go to the store," she said. "Margaret's been holding a bolt of cloth for the children. I told her I'd come when this was settled." "I'll walk with you," he said. She glanced at him. "People will talk." "People have been talking since I rode onto your property," he said. "I don't find that I mind much." She looked at him for a moment with that careful, measuring expression she had, the one that always felt like she was deciding how much to trust what she was seeing. Then something in it softened. "Neither do I," she said. And they walked. Margaret Alcott saw them coming through the store window and had the cloth on the counter before they were through the door. She was that kind of woman, always 3 steps ahead, never making you feel managed for it. "Willa Thompson," she said. "You look like a woman who just paid off a debt." "I am," Willa said. "To more than one person." She looked at Margaret directly. "I haven't forgotten the flower." "I told you it was alone. I know what you told me." Willa set her hand briefly on Margaret's. "I'll repay it. That's not a negotiation." Margaret looked at her, then at Jack, then back at Willa, with the expression of someone who had strong opinions and was for once keeping them in orderly reserve. "Fine," she said. "But the bolt of cloth is a gift, and I won't hear otherwise." She pushed it across the counter. "For the girls. That blue will suit Clara something wonderful." Willa touched the cloth. Her throat moved. "Thank you," she said. And this time it was warm. They talked for 20 minutes, the easy practical talk of women who understand each other about children and winter preparation, and the small mechanics of running a household. Jack stood near the door and let them have it, which was the right thing to do, and which Margaret acknowledged with one brief nod when Willa wasn't looking. On the way out, Margaret caught Jack's arm lightly. "You're coming to the church supper Saturday," she said. Not a question. "I hadn't planned—" "You're coming," she said. "Both of you." Another look that communicated more than the words. "This town needs to see that things have changed. It needs to see it plainly. You understand me?" He understood her. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Good man," she said, and went back to her counter. He called on her Thursday evening properly the way he'd said. He knocked on the front door. He had his good hat on. He brought a jar of honey from his own hives, which was not a grand gesture, but was a sincere one, and sincerity he'd found was more durable than grandeur. Willa opened the door and looked at the honey jar and the hat and the careful attention he'd given to his boots, and something moved across her face that she couldn't quite suppress. "Come in," she said. The children were still up. It was only 7. Lily attached herself to his left leg within approximately 90 seconds of his arrival, which was both an inconvenience and one of the finer things that had happened to him in recent memory. Clara showed him a drawing she'd done of Callie, which was recognizable mainly due to the spots she'd made with brown ink and the fact that it was labeled Callie in large crooked letters. Samuel sat across the table and watched Jack with those careful eyes and eventually said with the directness of his mother, "Are you going to keep coming here?" "Samuel," Willa said. "I'd like to," Jack said to the boy, "if your mother's agreeable." Samuel looked at Willa. Willa looked at Samuel with the expression of a woman outnumbered and aware of it. Then she looked at Jack. "She's agreeable," Samuel said with the authority of someone who had just resolved a matter that the adults were being slow about. Willa made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Jack didn't try to hide his smile. After the children were in bed, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee and talked. Really talked. Not about the case. Not about Steele. Not about logistics. About his ranch, the Appaloosa breeding program he'd been building for 4 years. About her father's farm in Missouri, where she'd grown up, the smell of the soil there, how Colorado had felt like standing on the edge of the world when she first arrived. About Daniel Gently, the way you speak of someone you've both decided to honor rather than avoid. About what she wanted for the children, what she was afraid of, what she hoped for. He told her things he hadn't said out loud in years. About his mother, who'd died when he was 19, and left him the land, and a very good horse, and not much else. About why he'd never married, not for lack of wanting, but because he was, as he put it plainly, the kind of man who needed to be sure, and he'd never been sure until recently. He said until recently, and then looked at his coffee cup. Willa said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "When you rode away that first morning after you decided to help me, I stood on that porch and thought that man is going to complicate everything." He looked up. "I was right," she said, and there was a warmth in it, not complaint. The warmth of someone describing a complication they've decided they're glad for. "I reckon I did," he said. She looked at him across the table. "I'm not easy," she said quietly, with the honesty of a woman who'd stopped pretending otherwise. "I have opinions, and I don't back down from them, and I have 3 children and a stubborn streak that Daniel always said could stop a mule." "I noticed," he said. "And you're still here." "I'm still here," he said. She held his gaze. Why? He thought about all the things he could say, the right words, the careful words, the words that wouldn't risk too much. And then he thought about a woman standing on a porch with a shotgun, and the absolute refusal to be smaller than the situation required, and he decided the careful words were not what this moment needed. "Because you're the most capable, honest, and genuinely remarkable person I've met in this county in 6 years, he said. "And because when you looked at me that first morning, like you'd already decided I was worth reasoning with, even with a shotgun in your hands, I thought there's a woman who doesn't waste anything. Not her words, not her courage, not her trust." He stopped. "I don't intend to waste being trusted by you." The kitchen was very quiet. Willa looked at him with full eyes, and a jaw that was set in that particular way that meant she was feeling something large, and making sure it didn't run away with her. "That's a very good answer," she said. Soft. "I meant every word," he said. She looked down at her coffee cup, looked back up. "I'm not ready to... I mean, the children need time, and I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking to keep coming on Thursdays." She looked at him for a long moment. "Thursdays," she said. "And maybe Saturdays," he said. "Margaret Alcott has informed me that we're attending the church supper." Willa stared at him. Then she did laugh, full and real, the kind that came from somewhere surprised. "She informed you?" She was quite firm about it. "She's been trying to get me to that supper for 3 months," Willa said. "She is a determined woman," Jack agreed. "Takes one to know one, apparently," Willa said, and looked at him with warmth, so unguarded it made him want to sit in it for the rest of his life. He was almost to the gate when she called after him. "Jack!" He stopped, turned. She was standing in the doorway, the lamplight behind her, and she said, "Callie, I know she's yours, and I know you could take her any time." She paused. "But the children have gotten attached, Clara especially, and I wonder—" "She stays," he said. "For as long as you'll have her." Willa looked at him. Something crossed her face, not surprise quite, but the expression of a person who keeps expecting less, and keeps being given more, and hasn't yet figured out how to stop being amazed by it. "Thank you," she said. "Good night, Willa." "Good night, Jack." He rode home under a sky full of stars, and felt for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember that the world was arranged correctly. He was at his gate when he saw it. His barn door was open. He always latched it, always without exception, every night of his life. He pulled his horse to a slow stop and sat very still and listened. Nothing moved. No sound that shouldn't be there. He got down quietly, tied the gelding to the post, and went to the barn with his hand near his hip. The inside was undisturbed. The horses were in their stalls calm. Nothing missing, nothing moved. Except on the center post, nailed with a single nail at eye height, was a piece of paper. He took it down and brought it to the door where the moonlight was stronger. It was a hand-drawn map. His property rendered with unsettling accuracy, the house, the barn, the water trough, the corral, the fence lines. And beside it, in a handwriting he didn't recognize, a man who minds other people's business should mind his own first. Jack stood there in the dark for a long moment. Then he folded the paper and put it in his pocket. He checked the horses twice, checked the house every room, checked the window locks which he'd never bothered with before. Then he sat in the dark kitchen and thought. Steele had lost in court. Canton had warned him publicly. The debt was paid, and the record was clean, and by every legal measure the matter was settled. But Victor Steele was not a legal measure kind of man. He was a patient man, a long memory man, the kind who filed things away and waited for the ground to shift. Jack had known this since the courthouse steps. He'd known it in the abstract, the way you know a storm is coming from the feel of the air. This was no longer abstract. He was at Hale's hotel room door at 7 the next morning. Hale read the note, looked at the map, set both down with the precise care of someone treating evidence as evidence. "This is intimidation," he said. "Not a threat legally, not actionable on its own." "I know. But if Canton's review of Steele's other contracts produces what I think it might produce—" "How long?" Jack asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3? Hale looked at him steadily. "Can you keep her safe for 3 weeks, Jack thought about boot tracks behind a barn, about 3 pairs of small boots on a porch, about a woman who walked through her own door at night and loaded her own shotgun and did not ask for help she didn't think was warranted. "Yes," he said. "Then we hold?" Hale said. "We don't react. We don't give him anything to use. We let Canton's process work." He looked at Jack carefully. "And you don't go near Steele?" "I wasn't planning to." "You were thinking about it." Jack was quiet. "I understand the impulse," Hale said. "I am telling you as a lawyer and a friend that the single worst thing you can do right now is give that man an excuse to make himself the victim." He held Jack's gaze. "The law is moving in her favor. Don't get in its way." Jack sat with that for a long moment. "Fine," he said. "Thank you," Hale said. And then, "You're going to ask her, aren't you?" Jack looked at him. "Ask her what?" Hale simply waited with the patience of a man who knew the answer and was merely enjoying the formality of the question. "When this is properly finished," Jack said finally. "Yes." Hale nodded once, satisfied. "Then let's finish it properly," he said. He told Willa about the note that evening, directly without softening it, because she deserved to know, and because she'd been managing real danger alone for months, and the absolute least he could do was treat her like the capable adult she was. She listened. Her face went still in that way he'd learned to read not fear, but the particular focus of a person assessing a threat and deciding how to meet it. "He came onto your property," she said, "or had someone do it, to warn you away from me. That's the message, yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at him with the directness that was simply her nature unadorned. "Are you warned away?" "No," he said. Something fierce and grateful moved through her eyes. "Good," she said, flat and absolute, with the particular conviction of a woman who had made a decision and wasn't revisiting it. "Hale says 3 weeks," Jack said. "Canton's reviewing Steele's other contracts. If it goes the way Hale thinks Steele is going to have considerably larger problems than us." 3 weeks, she said. I need you to tell me if anything happens. Anything at all. Tracks visitors, anything out of place. I will, she said. And she meant it not as a concession to his worry, but as a genuine agreement between equals. He looked at her across the table. I want you to know, he said, that whatever happens in the next 3 weeks, however this resolves my position, doesn't change. She looked at him carefully. Your position. About you, he said. About this. He gestured slightly, meaning the table, the house, the children asleep in the next room, the whole ordinary, extraordinary weight of it. That's not contingent on Steele or the court or anything else. She was very still. You're sure? She said. Quietly, not doubting him exactly. Needing to hear it confirmed in the way that people need to hear the things that matter most, said plainly out loud in real air. I'm sure, he said. She nodded. Once. The way she did when she'd received something and filed it somewhere safe and was going to carry it carefully. 3 weeks, she said again, steadying herself. 3 weeks, he confirmed. He left at 9, and this time when he checked his barn and found it properly latched and silent, he let out a breath that had been sitting in his chest all evening. 3 weeks. He could hold the line for 3 weeks. What he didn't know, couldn't know, as he settled his horses and went inside and lay awake in the dark, listening to his property for sounds that shouldn't be there, was that Victor Steele wasn't planning to give him 3 weeks. Steele was planning to move in 10 days, and he wasn't moving against Jack, he was moving against Willa. The move came on a Thursday. Jack was at the Thompson homestead. It was his day. The Thursday he'd claimed, and she'd agreed to, and they'd fallen into an easiness about it that felt both new and like something that had always been true. He was helping Samuel repair the paddock gate, which had been listing badly for weeks, and was now at the point of genuine failure. Samuel handed him nails with the grave focus of a boy who took tools seriously, and Jack worked and they talked in the comfortable way of people who didn't need to fill every silence. Willa was inside with the girls. He could hear Clara's voice through the window, some elaborate narrative involving Callie and a dragon that seemed to be resolving in everyone's favor. He heard the horses first, not one horse, several, moving fast. He set down the hammer and turned toward the road before he'd fully processed why some part of him already knowing that fast horses in the middle of a Thursday morning meant only one category of thing. There were 4 of them, Cord in front, which Jack had expected. 2 men he recognized as Steele's regular hands, which he'd expected, and then the 4th, which he had not expected at all. A man in a dark coat with a leather satchel, the particular look of someone official. And that was the thing that went cold in Jack's chest, because official was harder to handle than hired muscle. Samuel had gone still beside him. Go inside, Jack said quietly. Get your mother. Don't come back out. Samuel went. He didn't run. He moved with the careful speed of a boy who understood that running would show something they didn't want shown. His mother's son completely. Jack walked to the gate and stood in front of it and waited. Cord pulled up 10 feet away. The official-looking man pulled up beside him. Forrester, Cord said. Cord, Jack said. This isn't your property. No, Jack said. But I'm standing on it, and the woman who owns it hasn't invited any of you through that gate. He looked at the man in the dark coat. Who are you? The man straightened slightly. Gerald Marsh, County Assessor's Office. What's your business here? Marsh opened his satchel and pulled out a document. There's been a formal complaint filed regarding the water rights to this property. Specifically, that the creek boundary as recorded is incorrectly surveyed, and that the eastern 4 acres, including the creek, access properly belongs to the adjacent parcel, which is currently held by Mr. Victor Steele. The words landed exactly the way a knife lands, sudden, precise, and with intent. Jack held himself very still. That complaint was filed when, he said, 2 days ago. And you rode out here 4 men strong on a Thursday morning because of a survey dispute. Marsh had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Mr. Steele indicated the matter was urgent. I expect he did, Jack said. The front door opened. He didn't look back. He knew her step. Willa came to stand beside him at the gate. She'd heard enough he could tell by the set of her jaw, which was the particular set that meant she'd assessed the situation and was ready to walk through fire if required. "Mrs. Thompson," Marsh said with professional courtesy that sat awkwardly beside the company he was keeping. "I'm here regarding a survey complaint on your eastern boundary." "I heard," she said. Her voice was completely level. "On whose authority?" "The complaint was filed by Mr. Steele, but the review is a county process." "What review?" Jack said. "A complaint was filed 2 days ago. A formal survey review requires a 30-day notice period under county statute, a written notification to the property owner, and a scheduled assessment date, none of which has occurred." He looked at Marsh. "Has Mrs. Thompson received written notification?" Marsh paused. "The notification is, it was prepared." "Has she received it?" Another pause. Longer. "No," Marsh admitted. "Then there is no review today," Jack said. "There is a man who filed a complaint 2 days ago and sent you out here before the legal process has been properly initiated." He held Marsh's gaze. "I think you know that. I think you rode out here because someone pressured you into it, and I think you're starting to regret it." Marsh looked at the document in his hand. Something in his posture shifted the slow, uncomfortable recalibration of a person who'd told himself a story about what he was doing and was now watching it come apart. Cord moved his horse forward 1 step. "The surveyor can return with proper notice," he said, his tone carrying the weight of a man delivering a message that was larger than its words. "Or this can get handled today, informal, and we all go home." Jack turned and looked at Cord with the full quiet attention of a man who has decided something and is not interested in reconsidering. "Cord," he said, "you ride for wages, I understand that. But you and I both know that what Steele is asking you to do today is going to end your ability to work in this county when it comes out. And it will come out, because I will personally make sure every detail of this morning is in Thomas Hale's hands before sundown." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Go home." Cord stared at him. The 2 hands behind him exchanged a look that Jack caught and filed away the particular look of men who were recalculating their own involvement. Marsh was already folding the document back into his satchel. "All the proper notice will be issued," Marsh said to no one in particular, "through proper channels." "That's all anyone's asking," Jack said. Marsh turned his horse. The 2 hands followed him with visible relief. Cord stayed a half-second longer looking at Jack with something that wasn't quite anger anymore. Something more complicated. The look of a man who's carrying out orders he doesn't fully believe in, and is getting tired of the wait. Then he turned and rode after the others. Willa let out a breath beside him. Just one. Then, "The water rights. It's the same play as the letter," Jack said. "He can't take the land directly, so he's trying to make it worthless. Eastern Acres, the creek." "I know what he's doing," she said. Quiet and cold and absolutely clear. "He's not going to stop." "No," Jack said. "Not until something stops him." She looked at him. "Hale." "Hale," Jack confirmed. "I'm writing to him right now." She caught his arm, just her hand on his forearm, brief and direct. "Be careful," she said. Not be safe, not please, just those 2 words carrying everything. "Always," he said, and meant it more than usual. Hale listened to the account of the morning without expression, which Jack had learned meant he was thinking hardest. When Jack finished, Hale said, "Marsh, county assessor. I know who he is. I know something else about him, too." Hale went to his papers. He'd set up an effective working space in his hotel room that managed to look both temporary and permanent. "Gerald Marsh witnessed 2 of Steele's lending contracts in the last 3 years. I found it in the county records when I was pulling the Brierley case." He looked at Jack. "He's not an impartial officer. He's compromised." The silence that followed had weight to it. "That's Canton's territory," Jack said. "That is very much Canton's territory," Hale agreed. He picked up his pen. "I'm writing to him this afternoon." What happened this morning? An assessor arriving without proper notice in the company of the complainant's hired men, attempting to conduct an informal review that's not a survey dispute. That's an officer abusing his position under pressure from a private party. He looked up. Combined with the lending pattern, the Brierley case, and the note left on your property, we are building something considerably larger than a widow's debt. How large? Jack said. Hale was quiet for a moment. Large enough, he said carefully, that Victor Steele may be looking at more than a lost civil case. Jack sat with that. How long? He asked. Canton needs the letter today. He'll move fast. He warned Steele publicly, which means his own credibility is tied to following through. Hale sealed the envelope as he spoke. I'd expect something definitive within the week. She's got a week, Jack said. We can hold a week. I know you can, Hale said. And then because he was Thomas Hale and he didn't miss things, you were there when they rode up, on a Thursday morning. I was helping with the gate. The gate, Hale said in the tone of a man acknowledging a story without requiring it to be more accurate. Thomas, ride the letter to Canton yourself, Hale said, handing it over. Don't trust the post. And when this is done properly, done whatever you're planning to say to that woman, say it soon. She's been managing alone for too long, and she deserves to know what's coming toward her is good. Jack took the letter. Stood. You're a romantic for a lawyer. I'm practical, Hale said. Happy people make better decisions. Go. He rode to Canton's office directly. The judge was in, which was either luck or the particular alignment of a story that had decided where it was going. Canton read the letter standing up, which meant he'd decided it was important before he'd finished the first paragraph. He looked up when he finished. Marsh was there. With cord in two of Steele's hands, Jack said. No written notification had been issued. Canton set the letter down on his desk with the deliberate placement of a man making a decision in real time. I issued Steele a warning in open court, he said. I don't issue warnings I don't intend to back up. He picked up his pen. I'll have a county marshal at Steele's office by Monday. The assessor's records will be subpoenaed. If Marsh's involvement in those lending contracts is what Hale believes it is... He stopped, looked at Jack steadily. Mrs. Thompson's property is not going to be touched. You have my word on that. Thank you, Your Honor. Canton looked at him for a moment longer. You've done right by this family, Forrester, he said. Not warmly exactly, he wasn't a warm man, but squarely the way a judge offers respect, which is plain and unornamental, and worth more than effusion. Jack rode back to the Thompson place. He didn't tell her everything Canton had said. Not all of it, not yet, because he'd learned enough about her to know that probably and likely weren't what she needed. She needed done. She needed the ground under her to be solid before she could let herself believe it was. What he told her was, it's moving. Canton is moving. 1 more week. She looked at him. You're sure? As sure as I've been of anything, he said. She held his gaze. Then she nodded slowly, and something in her eyes said, I trust you with the particular weight of a woman for whom trust had been a long, costly, carefully considered thing. He stayed for supper. Clara put honey on everything. Lily fell asleep sitting up, and had to be carried to bed by her mother, who came back to the table with her hair loose from its pins, and a tiredness in her face that was the tiredness of someone who had been strong for a very long time and was beginning to believe cautiously that they might not have to be strong alone much longer. Samuel stayed up later than usual. When Willa told him it was time, he looked at Jack and said, Are you coming back tomorrow? Friday's not Thursday, Jack said. I know, Samuel said. I'm asking anyway. Jack looked at Willa. She was looking at the table, but her mouth had the curve of someone not allowing a smile. I'll come tomorrow, Jack said. Samuel nodded satisfied and went to bed. The county marshal arrived at Steele's office on Monday morning. Cord was there apparently, and said later in the Silver Creek saloon that he'd never seen Steele go that particular shade of pale before. The subpoena covered Marsh's records. It covered the Brierley contract. It covered 4 other lending documents that Canton's review had flagged over the previous week. Steele hired a second attorney by Tuesday. By Wednesday, the second attorney had reviewed the subpoenaed materials and had a private conversation with his new client that was by all accounts reconstructed later quite direct. On Thursday, Jack's Thursday. The Thursday, he was at the Thompson homestead this time, with no pretense about gate repairs, just sitting on the porch in the late afternoon, because it was where he wanted to be, and she'd stopped pretending she didn't want him there. Cass, the deputy, rode up fast and handed Jack a folded paper. Jack read it, looked up at Willa. "Steele is withdrawing all claims," he said. "The survey complaint, the eastern boundary filing, everything. His attorney filed a voluntary withdrawal with Canton's court this morning." Willa stared at him. "He's done," Jack said. "Willa, he's done." She pressed her hand flat against the porch railing. The knuckles went white for just a moment. Then she looked out at the yard, at Clara talking to Callie, at Lily drawing something in the dirt with a stick, at the 12 acres of Colorado summer that were hers fully and permanently hers, with no legal shadow remaining. "He's done," she said, slowly, like the words needed time to become real. "Canton's review isn't done," Jack said. "He may face charges over the Brierley case and the others. That's not our fight anymore. But for you, for this land, it's over." She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set, and he thought, the most beautiful person he'd ever seen in his life. Not because of anything surface, but because of what he was seeing underneath the grain of her, the way she was made, the particular combination of courage and love and stubbornness and tenderness that was Willa Thompson. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he confirmed. She sat down on the porch step. Not gracefully. The way she'd sat down in Hale's hearing after the ruling, just the body deciding it needed a moment. She put her face in her hands, and this time she did cry briefly, and without apology, the way a person cries when they're finally safe enough to. Jack sat down beside her on the step. Not across from her. Beside her. Close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't move away. After a while she lifted her face and looked at him, and her eyes were clear. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "That first morning, when you read those papers at my kitchen table and said there might be something to work with." She looked at him steadily. "I hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 2 weeks. I'd been running on fear and stubbornness, and I was so tired I could hardly see straight." She paused. "And when you said that there might be something, I thought for the first time since Daniel died, that the world might not just be a thing that happened to me, that maybe I had some say in it." Her voice was very quiet. "You gave me that. I want you to know I haven't forgotten it for a single day since." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that comes before something. "Willa," he said. "Yes. I have something I want to ask you." He turned to look at her directly. "Not today, not this minute, because you just got the biggest news of 2 years, and you deserve time to breathe, but soon. When you're ready." He held her gaze. "I think you know what I'm going to ask." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face, the full sequence of it like weather passing, and what settled on the other side of it was clear and warm and decided. "I think I do," she said. "And," he said, "and," she said, "when you ask it properly, Jack Forrester, with your good hat on." The warmth in her voice was unmistakable now, open, unguarded. He smiled, full and real. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Clara looked up from the fence at that moment. "Mama, why is Mr. Forrester smiling like that?" "Mind the horse, Clara," Willa said. "She's already minding me," Clara said with impeccable logic, and went back to her conversation with Callie. He asked on a Sunday, 3 weeks later on the porch at dusk, with his good hat in his hands, because he'd taken it off when he knocked and never put it back on. He asked plainly without performance, because she was a woman who valued plainness, and he was a man who had finally learned to offer what he actually had, rather than what he thought was expected. She said yes the way she did everything directly without hesitation, with the full weight of a decision she'd already made and was simply now confirming out loud. Samuel shook Jack's hand, which was the most serious thing a 7-year-old had ever done in Jack's presence. Lily screamed with delight and attached herself to his leg. Clara went immediately to tell Callie, which everyone agreed was correct and appropriate. They were married in October at Hope Springs Ranch with Margaret Alcott in the front row and Thomas Hale standing up for Jack and the 3 Thompson children, scrubbed and serious in their good clothes, and the Colorado mountains wearing the first cold of the season on their shoulders. Victor Steele was charged in November with fraudulent lending practices and misconduct in connection with Gerald Marsh. He sold his Main Street office to cover his legal fees and was not seen in Fort Lyon again. The eastern 4 acres where the creek ran remained with the land. It was Samuel who suggested they name the ranch properly. He'd been thinking about it, he said with characteristic gravity, and he thought it should be called something that meant what it was. Jack looked at Willa. Willa looked at Jack. "Hope Springs," she said. He nodded. "Hope Springs." He agreed. Callie lived another 11 years and let every one of the Thompson children and eventually their children learn to ride on her back. She was patient and gentle and particular about who she trusted, and every person she trusted knew they'd earned something real, which was Jack Forrester thought every morning for the rest of his life exactly the right way to live. The Colorado summer of 1876 had begun with a stolen horse and a woman who refused to back down, and a man who rode 2 miles home, telling himself he wasn't thinking about gray-green eyes. It ended with a family. And that all of that, every hard mile of it, had been entirely, absolutely worth the ride.